Sacramento has a new radio station, or a new station was launched in April 2017 called 93.7 The River. This is supposed to be like a classic rock station for people that aren't as old as the hippies. So, in other words, they want to brand it as a Gen X type classic rock station, which to me is a little bit ridiculous. A little bit ridiculous, especially since one of the feeds they're running is Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue. Guess what year he was born? 1958. You're going to call that a Gen Xer? Normally, marketers are the ones who came up with this thing called Gen X, not normal people. So that they could sell to that demographic, just like they came up with all the other names, Generation Y, Generation Boomer. All these names are meant to be easy catchphrases for the marketing industry. And sometimes people misunderstand it as cultural names. It's nothing of the sort. And just to give you a quick example of why that's true, I was born in 1962. Technically, I'm younger than Nikki Sixx, so does that make me an Xer? I've never thought of myself as an Xer, even though I programmed KWOD, the alternative station, in the 90s, and some might say, oh, well, that was the Gen X crowd. That was the 18 to 34 demo back then, and that was Gen X. I never thought of it that way. I never labeled any generation anything. I mean, technically, I might be considered a boomer because marketers have defined boomers as people born between 1946 and 1966. I was born in 62. Nikki Sixx was born in 58, so he's a boomer more than an Xer. And then Gen X would be 66 through... it's hard to say. I don't know if they ever put an ending on that, but then they try to call the next generation Y, and I wonder what the next one will be called after that. The thing about this story in the Sacramento Bee is that the headline was Move Over Boomers, Gen X Gets Its Own Classic Rock Station. Okay, that's pretty funny to me. It's a funny headline that misses the point of radio. And radio itself misses the point of the audience because it's too busy slicing and dicing the audience and going after certain demographic cells. And also, Gen X means nothing in the first place. Keep that in mind. The music of the 90s, the alternative music, had nothing to do with trying to be music of somebody's generation. I think the way a lot of people get confused by all this is that in the 60s, you had The Who coming out with a song called My Generation. And so a lot of people, because the 60s was such a radical change from previous eras, because it was a social change era, you see. And before that, a lot of stuff just stayed the same forever. So it was a big shock to the system, especially to the establishment in the 60s when you had bands questioning the establishment, questioning authority, questioning the war, which we now know was based on lies. That's why that era stood out, is because people were waking up, talking back to the system. It was kind of their first opportunity to do so because media had expanded to the point where you could start to pick and choose your media at that point. But before that, media was very, very controlled, just one big pipeline. The only reason people still listen to radio is because it's free. If you had to pay for radio, would you listen to it? I don't think so. Anyway, this river station. Okay, I'm not going to talk too badly about it because I have some friends that work there, and I think that it's nice that they're still in the biz. I myself have no desire to be in the biz at this point, based on the direction it's headed. I would steer it in a completely radically different direction, which is exactly why none of these companies would hire me, because they don't get it. They think. Anyway, Gen X, man. Who goes around saying it? Oh man, I'm from Gen X. Like, we never talked about that on KWOD in the 90s. Okay, and we were the top station for that demographic. But we weren't going for just that demographic. At least I wasn't as I was programming the station. I was going for what's called a psychographic. That's based on lifestyle, not age groups. Okay, the lifestyle I was going for when I was programming this music had nothing to do with how old you were. It had nothing to do with what year you were born. It had nothing to do with what your overall musical tastes were, because this station was designed to be outside of all of that thinking, all of that corporate thinking, all that corporate talk that ruined the industry, that caused it to become billions in debt because it listened to the wrong people for too long. People who thought they had answers but didn't. People who see the world as just age groups and think you can slice and dice people. Now, once again, I was born in 1962. Does that mean everybody that was born in 1962 thinks like I do? Not at all. Just like anyone born in 1970, you know, is going to have their own unique thoughts, you know, and isn't necessarily going to conform to everybody else of that same exact era, regardless of what marketers think or how they push their products on these people. But I guarantee you that when Lennon and McCartney wrote songs, they weren't thinking, oh, is this going to be for 12-year-olds, 34-year-olds, or is this for soccer moms, or is this for all ages? I actually think they were thinking all ages if they were thinking of anything at all. And that's what I was thinking of KWOD in the 90s, is not necessarily all ages in the sense that it's a family station. It wasn't quite that. It was more like a station for anybody who liked the rock and roll lifestyle of all eras. You see, we didn't necessarily play rock of all eras, but we didn't sit there and act like we were reinventing rock or coming up with a new form of rock. Even though that word grunge was used a lot by the press in the 90s, it had nothing to do with what we were doing other than, you know, maybe once an hour, once every couple hours, we played a hard rock song from Seattle. But most of the hits that came out of the Seattle bands were radio-friendly ballads or mid-tempo songs that just fit right in the mix, that could fit in all kinds of different formats, guitar-based formats. I don't know, this idea that all we did was play hard rock, grunge, that's just not even true, not even close to true. So people who think that, you've been misled, and anyone who calls that music classic rock today is a little bit ridiculous, because classic rock, even though it can mean whatever you want it to mean, it can mean whatever the industry wants it to mean, and the industry, the radio industry, is who coins these terms for formats, and the music industry coins terms for genres. If you just want to call any old rock, just because it's old, classic rock, I guess you have the right to do that. But part of the reason why a lot of classic rock radio stations got stale is they didn't really evolve. They just stuck with a 500-song playlist, just kept grinding it out, same Led Zeppelin songs over and over and over again. Oh, and when there's so much great music to explore that didn't get played. But to a radio guy who doesn't know music, who's never played an instrument in his life, doesn't really know what music is, only understands it as a fan and as a marketer and not as a creator, isn't going to understand a single word I'm talking about. Certain music is timeless, just like certain art is timeless. Certain playwrights are timeless, like Shakespeare. Name a bigger playwright than Shakespeare after Shakespeare. Name a bigger band than the Beatles after the Beatles. Okay, you can't do it because we're talking about super legends here. And certain periods spawn super legends and certain periods don't. So to sum it up for anyone who's still in the dark about this, some art is timeless. Just like certain playwrights are timeless, like Shakespeare. Name a bigger playwright after Shakespeare. Probably can't do it because it just didn't happen. History doesn't remember anyone bigger than Shakespeare in that field. Just like history doesn't remember anyone bigger than the Beatles in the whole period of rock music. And certain stuff from the 90s, even going back to the 80s or 70s, it still stands up as fresh music. You know, even if you've heard it a million times, there's something very artistic about it and it just never dies. Even Led Zeppelin, who got overplayed by classic rock radio, a lot of their stuff stands up as monumental art. So this idea that every era generates the same stuff and history keeps repeating like a merry-go-round is not true. I'm sorry. But the legends of rock and roll come from the 50s through the 90s, and then after that it just all went corporate and kind of got sour. Okay, there's still a big audience for rock. That's why radio can get away with this river station, because it appeals to a lot of rockers. Rock is a wide spectrum of music. Okay, there's probably always great rock at any given time, but not necessarily from the major labels. Definitely not on the charts. My job actually was to get the ratings for the station, and I did that by doing super creative programming. Gee, that works. Try it sometime.